Welcome everybody, thanks for joining the second ever Alban Talk. As you know, this will be with my wonderful colleague Johannes Moser. Most of you will know him without a doubt, so I will keep the introduction of one of the most successful cellists of today as short as possible. Like most top soloists, he has played with every major orchestra, from Berlin to Los Angeles Philharmonic, NHK Tokyo, Royal Concertgebouw, Tonhalle Zürich. The list would be shorter if I just mentioned the ones he has not played with. He has worked with the greatest conductors, dead or alive, most famously among the younger ones Gustavo Dudamel and Yannick Nézet-Séguin, but also the old great ones like Muti, Mazel, Mehta, Gergiev, Thielemann. Again, we should focus on the ones he has not played with. He's playing standard repertoire as well as the more unknown one, and championing new pieces by composers like Julia Wolf, Alan Reed, Thomas Agerfeld-Olesen, Johannes Kalitzke, Bernd Richard Deutsch, Jelena Firsova, and more prominently probably the two concertos performed with LA Phil by Enrico Chapella and Andrew Norman. What most of you might not know are the three things we have in common. Not only did we grow up in a musical household, but his mother was a singer like mine, although his was much better and much more famous, and his father was a cellist in one of the world's greatest orchestras, the Symphony Orchestra of the Bayerische Rundfunk, while my father played at Berlin Philharmonic for 44 years. And then, like myself, Johannes spent 3 seasons cut short by COVID as artist in residence with the Oregon Symphony Orchestra. But what probably nobody knows, unless I mentioned it in our last talk, that we both applied for the same teaching job at the Hochschule für Musik in Köln. He got it while I didn't even make it to the interview. Oh, and we are both born in the last year of our decade, me in 1969 and he in 79. So without any further ado, welcome dear Johannes, and thanks for giving me the honor of having you as my second ever guest on Alban Talk.
Alban, it's wonderful to be with you. Really, absolutely great.
As you know, I asked my patrons to provide some questions, as I wanted to keep it as wide open as possible. But before I go through the wonderful questions they posed, one important one I completely forgot to ask you. Did you ever play the Andrew Norman concerto, and how was it?
Well, no, because it was never written. And it's really a shame because we had wonderful commissioning partners lined up. You mentioned LA, but there was also San Francisco as a premiering orchestra. There was Seattle Symphony. And I got to play other pieces with these orchestras. So, for example, in San Francisco, I played Ludoslavsky, which had never been performed with that orchestra. So we had some sort of premiere there. But of course, I'm still hoping that Andrew is going to put some ink on paper and write it down. I guess the lockdown for some composers nowadays is very inspiring, and for some it's like a dead end.
Oh, what a pity, because I was actually looking forward to that concerto. I love his music, and he was one of the composers on a list I had made to approach. And then when I tried it, somebody told me that he was writing one for you, and I thought, okay, great. If it's any good, and I'm sure it would be fantastic because he's a wonderful composer, I would have picked it up, because I don't need him to write another concerto for me. I would just love to play yours, if I may.
That's of course the things that I hope, and I guess for you it's the same, that the pieces that we commission that then are taken up by other cellists, and they make of it what they feel is right. I mean, I don't know if Unsuk Chin's concerto, for example, has been performed much after you've performed it.
Well, I think Tanya Tetzlaff did it, and then 2-3 other people. The principal cellist of Toronto Symphony, he played it. So I think I had
excellent.
A couple of other performances, but not enough. Once I played the Pincher concerto, and the journalist asked me how it felt to play a concerto which was not written for me. It's like the most stupid question, actually. We most play pieces not written for us.
I mean, I guess the most difficult thing is to program the second performance after the commissioning partners have run out. And there's so many great pieces that are in the archives, shall we say, and even from 20th century pieces that were written for Rostropovich. I mean, who plays the Jolivet these days? Who is playing, I mean, he commissioned what I think 65 or 70 concertos, and then, X amount of sonatas. But what to do? I think, as we see with Rostropovich, the pieces that had success were the pieces that he shopped around. So obviously Shostakovich, namely number one, and I mean later number two, but I think number one really also put him into stratosphere. Prokofiev. But even when it comes to Lutoslawski and Dutilleux, I think there were other cellists that then took these pieces that played it with, maybe a more strong connection. He himself said that he doesn't have such a strong connection to, for example, the Dutilleux. And someone told me that the first performance, was rather adventurous. Whereas I think, there is a video of him doing the first performance of the Britten Cello Symphony, which is fantastic, and he has it by memory, and he plays like his life depends on it. So I think there might have also been amongst the armada of composers that he was writing for. There, of course, were some that he felt more connected to than others, and I mean, I think you and I both know very well which composers that write for us. We feel that this is a language that we can identify with, and others it's just like, yeah, I'll play the notes, I'll try the best I can, but my connection might not be so strong.
What do you think would be a piece which will survive, which you commissioned? I mean, what? Because we never know beforehand. That's the problem. Obviously, we don't know anybody. I mean, we hope that those people we know, they become as famous or as long-lived as Shostakovich and Prokofiev and Britten as Rostropovich did. But in our cases, we don't know. I don't know if Unsuk Chin will be performed in 50 years. I hope. I think she's wonderful, but there's not a guarantee for that.
I would say from the concertos that have been written for me, I would think that Chapela would be very successful because it's very, it's written for an electric cello and orchestra, and it ticks all the boxes of an electric cello concerto. So I mean, it has rock in it, it has jazz in it, it has klezmer in it. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge, it's a little bit of a mix. But so far, it seems like there are very few, let's say, soloists that perform on major stages that, first of all, own an electric cello and know how to use all the electronics. And I think there's an abundance of people that play the electric cello, but they don't necessarily have the technical chops to tackle that piece. So it puts it in a weird position. But for example, just before the lockdown, I premiered the Bernd Richard Deutsch concerto, and for example the Franz Welser Möst and Cleveland, they perform a lot of his pieces, and so there are some orchestras that really push him. And I think he is a composer to stay, and I think he's absolutely wonderful.
Sure, but how did it feel when you play the Deutsch concerto?
Well, I think, in order to judge a piece of its quality, I think, at least for me, it's good to judge all the layers. And first of all, I think a piece needs to have drama, and it needs to grab people, not just on the fifth hearing, but on the first hearing. And I think that's definitely what that concerto does.
Yeah, and then obviously the balance questions, because I think most of the pieces in the last 30 years often have these far too heavily written orchestra parts. I mean, one of the pieces I performed, I won't say the composer, but the composer himself admitted that it was heavily overwritten. And I suggested to him to thin it out, but he said no, that would take away the sense of the whole piece. So some of those people are aware that it's too much, but then they cannot take the step back, I guess.
Well, with the Johannes Kalitzke, which is a fantastic piece, by the way, we amplified the cello a little bit. We had two small speakers, you couldn't really see them, and they were like monitor speakers, and it just lifted the cello a little bit because the writing was extremely heavy. There were a lot of electronics involved, and I have no shame with that. I mean, we all know that there is a limit to the cello in terms of projection.
I mean, if you play the Britten Cello Symphony, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did.
The ending is quite problematic. For anybody who doesn't know the piece, it's actually a glorious ending, but the orchestra cannot play gloriously, otherwise they overpower us. So they have to play soft, but then it's not glorious anymore. So one orchestra musician suggested to have me amplified for the last, 20 bars, and we did it. And it was such a much better ending ever, because they didn't have to play down, and the piece, I mean, I love that piece. I think it's a very strong piece, but the ending doesn't work as written. So there, I have no shame either to amplify it.
Yeah, it's an awesome suggestion. I wonder though with that ending, because it's so awkwardly orchestrated, if it's intentional. Like if he tried to make a triumph, but make it sort of weird. I don't know.
That's a very good point. But the last time I played it at Snape at the Maltings. And I suggested the amplification, and the guy who runs the show there, he says, no, trust me, it's written for that hall, it works in that hall. And actually it worked. I mean, what do I know? Wasn't listening in the audience. But they claimed that it was functioning. I mean, the orchestra still didn't play fortissimo, obviously, but they were not down, and I had a good feeling about it as well. So maybe it was really written for Snape Maltings, and for other concert halls it doesn't work as well. One of my patrons, Valerie Ephraim, she would like to us compare daily routines and to know what we think of each other's routines. So you know mine, I don't know yours exactly. How are they different?
I try to be relatively creative with my daily routines. So I try to put in my daily routines what I also need in my practice. So, I never played the Sinfonia Concertante, so I'm taking this lockdown in order to learn it. So obviously for my learning purposes, I'm including tenths, every morning. So I do double stops every morning, and tenths is just added to that. Also ninths, by the way, which I find very helpful. Then I think it is less of a fixed routine, but I'm trying to connect more with the instrument, like in the morning. I just try to play open strings. I try to get close to the vibration, just see where the cello is at today, and then where I'm at. The daily routine that I do is that I warm up before I take the cello. So I either do 20 minutes of yoga, or I go for a run for an hour, or I try to do some sort of physical exercise in order to get my blood flowing. Because I think the worst thing that you can do is that you go to the instrument cold. And I think all of the injuries that I've ever had in my youth came because I got out of bed and went straight to the instrument, and either I got injuries here at the arm, or my fingertips were getting very sensitive. So I try to be in a good physical condition before I touch the instrument. And then anything from double stops to scales, and relating to what I'm playing. So if I play Haydn D, obviously I go through D major scales with the fingering of the piece. I think it is so weird that a lot of people they practice scales, but then they use a completely different fingering when they actually play pieces. I think it's important to warm up with pieces that don't matter. So let's say etudes or student concertos or something like that, because I think pieces have memories. And if I go to the instrument cold and I start practicing Haydn D, there is a memory of the piece that will recall at some point that I was playing it badly, and the brain cannot necessarily discern between good or bad. It just notes what happened. And so I think in order to get the unnecessary mistakes out of the way of the pieces, it's good to leave them with your warm-up routine.
But how did those change? I mean, Peng Mi asks if what we grew up with and now our daily routines. I mean, with me they didn't change all that much, as I stuck to the basic stuff, but I think you put much more thinking into it than me.
No, I don't think I do. I think there is a sort of basic canon of things that I want to get out of the way, which is scales and double stops. And I think especially in getting the different intonations right, so the pure intonation in the double stops and the Pythagoreic intonation in the scales, just to have those different systems clear in my mind and clear in my hands. But I think what changed rather recently, well, I would say since I'm teaching, since 2012, is that I'm trying to apply more creativity with the warm-up. Our brain is programmed to go on autopilot. And the thing that I have to fight against is that I do not jump into autopilot when I practice, because I know my routines and I know how to practice my shifts, and suddenly sometimes I jolt up and I'm like, what have I been doing for the last 10 minutes, because I was on autopilot practicing. And that certainly is not when the brain is learning. The brain is learning when I'm alert and active and very much aware of what I'm doing.
Well, maybe that's why I'm reading the paper at the same time. I'm not an autopilot, but I'm not really paying attention either, I guess. So I should rethink my whole daily routine thing, because all what you say makes a lot of sense.
Is it the Zeit that you're pursuing, or
yeah? I have on the tablet. I'm reading the Zeit, and I only have to interrupt every 45 seconds to swap down the next page or something.
That's fantastic.
It's really very. But I always had that already as a kid in school. In second or third grade, my teacher told my mother, "Well, you know, Alban is reading in the lessons," and my mother was upset, and she told the teacher, "Well, why don't you stop him?" And the teacher said, "Well, whenever we ask him, then he knows what was going on." So somehow I can go on both channels, I guess. So when I read the paper, I can still listen to myself. But maybe, so I was not even kidding. Maybe that really keeps me away from being on autopilot, because I completely agree. The autopilot thing is the worst what can happen, not only in routines, but also in playing. I mean, we play something, and I think that's why people are sometimes shocked when they listen to a recording of themselves and they don't recognize what they hear. Because often I think our problem is we hear something in our head and then we don't really pay attention if that comes out.
And that's why at least for me personally, I love to record myself while I practice. So I always have a recording device there, usually without camera, because I find it less distracting. I just go for sound. And I am often shocked about the difference, what I thought came out, and sometimes good things that I didn't expect, but more often things that I wanted to do, they don't come out at all. So it's always good to have that check from the outside.
Yeah, that's actually one of the best recommendations for any student to record oneself as much as possible. Changyit Fei, one of my patrons, he asked about injury prevention. So you described that very nicely with warming up and not starting cold, like a sports person. I mean, you're sportive, I know, and I used to be more active than I am right now, but playing the cello is more like sport. So, I mean, not more like sport, but has a lot of elements of being a sportsman. Actually, Tortelier said that in a masterclass. He named 10 things which we had to be, like poet and composer and musician, and number 6 or 7 was sportsman. And then he went down, the 78-year-old man, and he did 10 push-ups on the stage of the Conservatoire in Geneva. So it's good to warm up the brain, warm up the hands. Another good question Changyit Fei asked is, he wants to know about bottlenecks and breakthroughs. So you have any bottlenecks and breakthroughs you might want to share?
When I got the call from my agent that I was going to perform the first time with Berlin Phil, I was super excited and I was like, yeah, that's fantastic. And I hung up the phone and I was like, no, what am I going to do? Because I felt like I was in no way ready and prepared to perform with that orchestra. Because I had grown up with the Karajan recordings, and my father as a student and later on as a young adult had played in that orchestra. He's always said beside Weinsheimer, which of course you know him very well. And so in a way that was sort of the holy grail, and I felt like I did not belong there. Yeah. And so what I did is I worked with a sports coach and a sports psychologist in order to prepare me for that date. And those 2 years of psychological work really helped me not only for the performance with the Berlin Phil, but also just in my pursuit of being a cellist, first of all, of understanding that the audience is not your natural enemy. And once I understood that, my life was much better, I must say.
Good.
Because I know. By the way, I had an idea, and this is probably absolutely terrible, but don't you think it would be interesting, like with all the master classes that are going on, if like we paired different soloists together to give each other a lesson, I mean, it would be carnage, but it would be fun to watch, don't you think?
Maybe fun to watch. I don't know, to participate. Yeah. Well, would they
like,
be honest?
It would be like, no, but the amount of bullshit that would be going on would just be fantastic, I think.
Very good point. I mean, just to see how people react, and then somebody plays a passage you don't agree with at all and try to put it nicely and respectful, and maybe one can even learn as a teacher from that. Because I'm sure, I mean, I've never treated students in a bad way, but I've seen on some public masterclasses some famous people treat their students horribly. So maybe we should take these guys and pair them. But I'll keep a note of that. That's a very good idea.
Please do. And we call it King Kong versus Godzilla, and then we just let them battle it out.
let them figure out who's King Kong and who's Godzilla.
Exactly.
Another very good question I thought was from Caroline Paulson, who wants to know how we balance technique and musicality and how to let go. I mean, obviously we have to practice technique, but how can one teach and how can one practice to really let go?
I think what comes to mind is to always understand that technique is a servant to a higher cause, and technique by itself is probably the most uninteresting thing, because nowadays, I mean, as you know, I teach in Köln. I get 14-year-old girls from Korea that play the Sinfonia Concertante perfectly for me. But the question is, well, what do you do technically that then will lead to music, or will lead to poetry, or will lead to a philosophical understanding of what we're doing? You know, technique by itself is absolutely uninteresting, and it's just a tool. And you know, in order to answer the question with a balance, I think it's always good to sharpen your tools, but then use them for something that is actually useful. But how would you say you balance that?
How do we let go of it? That's actually a tough question, because what you're describing is the goal. I mean, obviously we shouldn't think of technique, but there's always a mix, isn't it, when we perform? I mean, I think the brain switches on and off with being in control and then letting the control go. And then one of the stories I told at some points was when I did my very first competition. I was completely underprepared. I was too young, and I played the Beethoven D major sonata. And actually the whole round was quite good. I mean, I got kicked out afterwards anyway. But in my favorite movement, the slow movement, I started trembling like crazy. And I couldn't control it. I completely screwed up that movement. And I asked my mother later, and I said, why? I mean, I practiced it well, I was as well prepared. And my mother said, she quoted Stanislavski, the famous Russian director, I guess, stage director. And he said that one should never completely indulge, but we should always be a little bit in control. But actually the question of Caroline is how let we go of the control. We must not let go of the control completely. We have to stay in control without letting the people know. We have to be so well prepared that in the moment going on stage, for me, it's quite important to understand that nobody gives a shit if we screw up. So when practicing, I want it absolutely perfect. But when performing, I'm completely aware that actually most of the things happening won't really matter. And one of my most success I had was with Rococo Variations in 1992. The most success, I'm not talking about audience. I talk about my father, who never says anything nice until today. I mean, I can play my heart out. It's like, okay, hi, how are you? The only times he ever had tears in his eyes was after playing Rococo in Hamburg with the Hamburg Symphony. I remember that so well because it's the first and last time my father seemed to be touched after I played. I thought I had completely failed. It was out of tune. I had a memory slip. Things went completely wrong. And I was quite shocked that the audience was warm. And I hardly wanted to go back on stage. And then, as I said, afterwards my father had tears in his eyes. So me overcoming all the problems I had technically and memory-wise, something else happened. So that actually taught me a lesson that perfection on stage is not really we have to thrive for, but in the performance, it does not matter what if something goes wrong, if you have a blackout, if you play something out of tune. I mean, I still hate when I play out of tune, but I tell myself, no, it's fine. Let's just go play from your heart and don't worry about these things.
I also think when the question is like how to let go, it's also good to trust yourself and to trust the brain. People say that your conscious mind can make about 40 decisions a second, and your subconscious can make about 400,000, because it needs to take care of all the organs and needs to take care of all the things that go on in your body. And so if we practice something that is so part of our DNA that it goes into our subconscious, then we can rely on the subconscious and be like, okay, the subconscious is going to take care of 99.999% of things, and my consciousness can sort of steer the ship, but it's not going to take care of the motor, and it's not going to take care of the sharks, and it's not going to take care of catering on board, but I'm just steering that MS Europa through the hurricane. And that kind of level of trust, where it's like, okay, my subconscious and my conscious, they're working together, and each of them, they have different tasks to do.
Absolutely. Well, I love the analogy with being the captain on that MS Europa. Very nice picture. I won't forget that. And the hurricane, which piece would be the hurricane piece for you?
No, some are just mild storms. No, the hurricane for me are two pieces. First of all, Carter cello concerto, which I didn't understand one note, and second one is the Schönberg Mon concerto, which I'm supposed to play in January. Hopefully, it takes place in London. It's a concerto that I think first was written for Feuermann, and then Feuermann said, I don't want it. It's too difficult. And then I think Casals took it, or the other way around. I don't know. I have to read up again how it was. But this is a piece that I think is written to let the cellist smash into a wall and let the cellist fail publicly.
I have some letters. I mean, the guy of the gentleman Bernard Meillat, who runs the Casals festival in wherever El Vendrell. He has all the letters between Schönberg and Casals, because it was Schönberg who wrote it for Casals, and Casals never touched it. And I thought, when I played the piece many years ago, I thought Schönberg was mocking Casals. But if you read the letters, no, Casals, Schönberg had the highest respect of Casals. He thought he was the greatest cellist of all times, so he didn't want to under-challenge Casals. And I have heard that line from many living composers. They're afraid of under-challenging us. Whenever I talk to a composer, I make sure that they don't have to be afraid of making it super hard for me. I'm happy if it's not the hardest ever. I'm happy if there's some space for me to express. And I think that's the problem with Schönberg. He tried to make it so hard, not to mock Casals, but to live up to the highest possible technical level Casals might have had. Now, there was one very interesting question by Guido Sharma, who wants to know which role the awakeness and spirituality play in musical daily life.
Performance for me always has a sort of ritualistic and very unexplainable magic to it. Yeah, that's I think why I miss performing so much. This sort of magic and energetic relationship between a performer and an audience, and the exchange of energy that happens, is something that, at least in my life, I've not been able to replicate with anything else. This may also tie into the earlier question about bottlenecks and breakthroughs. Once I understood that we are all part of an experience that is otherwise impossible to create if not all the pieces are in place, then my nerves went away. So we produce noise, and it gets catalyzed through the listener into music and into emotion and into feeling. And that energy then gets sent back to the performer, which is, me personally, I'm never quite exhausted after a performance, because I feel the exchange of energy is actually rather remarkable, and it's a very invigorating experience. You know, if your patron is referring to spirituality, I think there is something spiritual about the act of the concert. And I love this moment when the curtain goes up, also in opera, when then the curtain goes up and there is something to see, and it's done live. And you don't get that in cinema because it's not created live. It's not created in the moment, I think.
And you don't get that on YouTube either. That's why I actually haven't watched much music on YouTube in my life ever. I mean, I've never watched a digital concert hall in my life, even though it's outstanding stuff out on there. But I got 2 free passes, as you must have gotten after your performances, but I've never even broken in, not even to watch myself, because it doesn't do it to me. I love going to live concerts, and that's why also the live streaming, playing for live stream, or playing now, I've played the other day for no audience. We try to get into it, but it feels somehow completely wrong. I mean, I have played in my life. My first concert ever in Vienna was in, I think, 1985. I played piano four hands with a lady, and we played in Bösendorfer Hall in front of 3 people. So that felt like live stream. and actually, well, if you then focus on those 3 people, it's fine. I don't know what your fewest audience was, but even later, I played once in front of 2 people in 1996 or 7. So I have had my empty halls in my life, but it is not as you describe. If the energy comes back, and that's why I sometimes had a hard time. The first times in Japan, for example, I didn't feel that easy connection. It took me a while to get more used to, because there's energy flowing too. It's one of the most educated audiences in the world, probably, but it's not this easy flow. I mean, there are audiences where the flow is more immediate than probably in Japan, but and it's so inspiring if you get that direct input to play better. Important one is obviously Donald Pistolesi's question about the E-flat major suite, since we chose his photo on his coffee mug when you were stretching, inspired by me complaining about the E-flat major suite.
Yeah, it's a fantastic picture. I love it. Shout out to the wonderful coffee mug owner. It's really great. What was the question again?
How to avoid the strain in that piece which seems to resist the cello.
I don't think you should resist that strain at all. I think the strain is part of the emotional and of the of the friction and of the energy of the piece. I find the question of intonation extremely challenging and interesting, because obviously A and D string are, if you want to play the intonation very Pythagorean, then you need to play the E flat and the B flat very low. If you play it in a more pure intonation, then of course you can play it a little bit higher. But I for example, a lot of people avoid this first stretch. This, and I think that makes, for me, is part of the magic. Is that we go to an extreme and we try to show that tension.
I completely agree with you. I think fingerings should be dangerous, and to take the easy way out. I avoid to go over the strings because I like the clarity of an A string. I suffer. I mean, the best example for my stubbornness in trying to play the last movement of Haydn C major, the runs on one string, which I don't succeed in concert. It's horrible. I end up faking, and it's so much easier to go on the D string. But I want it's silly. But I can refer to your idea of making it more difficult, except for the E flat major suite. I mean, and now watching you show it, you have an amazing hand. I mean, your hand in the stretch still looks relaxed for that beginning. Mm-hmm. So I remember when I was little, I could hardly get through it. I got so tight and everything hurt. And I'm glad I found a way now where I can be a bit more relaxed. But the stretch I couldn't do because my stretch would be so big.
Right. Well, I also have an instrument that is more on the small side. I'm also exhausted afterwards, and then when I go to yom I'm like because I've had such strange vulnerability.
See, by Andrzej Lekes from Prague, he wants to know how to work on multiple pieces. that's actually really quite difficult. Like if you prepare a CD, let's say with 70 minutes of music, and you have all these pieces to prepare.
Well, I mean, if I think back, for example, at my preparation to go to Tchaikovsky, which was 12 pieces, which at the time when I was still studying, seemed like Mount Everest, to cross the Mount Everest in your shorts, basically. And of course, there I had the luxury that I had already played pieces in the past, so those I didn't need to practice from scratch. But I do write how would you say Wochenplan, like a weekly plan or schedule. Thank you, like a weekly schedule on what I want to practice when, yeah, I mean, usually when it's a normal season, I will count back from my performances. Let's say, for some pieces I need more time. For example, for Walton, which I haven't played so often, I would need 2 months in advance. For Dvorak, maybe 3 weeks to bring it up to speed again. But I put it in the calendar and I make a very specific plan. That doesn't mean that unfortunately that I follow it religiously. I mean, I'm then usually behind my own plan, but at least I have some sort of frame of reference when it's time to have something ready. And also when it's time to put something away, because I think the most difficult thing is to decide when is it enough. Like when you have 10 pieces, when is it enough to put away piece 1 to 4, and say, okay, now these are gonna sleep for a while, and then I can work on other things. And usually I have to force myself to put things away and let them develop while resting. And that for me is the most challenging thing, actually.
I think that's a very important point to have the self-confidence to say, okay, maybe it's not where I want it to be, but sometimes a week of rest will let the piece grow. Sometimes you put it away, even though you might have to play it in a month, but then put it away for a week and focus on the other pieces you might have to play in that recital or whatever you're preparing for, and then get it back, and suddenly things work by themselves. I mean, that even happens with me when I take a holiday. Or now I haven't practiced for 2 weeks. I will start tomorrow, I promise. And I know it will feel better. I've had that experience that some things go easier if we actually get out of the way of the cello. And with pieces, definitely. Yeah. So resting the piece, especially when you play it for the first time, it's good to have it lay down and grow by itself. As you said so beautifully, with the subconscious. I mean, there's so much in our subconscious we have no idea. And to let it breathe and grow by itself is sometimes much more successful than pushing every day with the same thing. Sometimes you will see the decline. I maybe not with you, but when I was going
for sure.
too eager, sometimes it's really like, okay, enough, let it rest, and then it might hopefully get better after a while.
Well, I think what is important to understand when learning the repertoire is that we don't learn while we practice, but we learn while we rest. So if I learn new repertoire like I do now with the Sinfonia Concertante, I have to make sure that after a day of 6 hours of practice, I get my 8 hours of sleep. Because what happens is that when we practice, we program or we fill up our conscious, and during sleep, whatever is in the conscious gets transferred through dreaming and through, whatever is happening, gets transferred to the subconscious. Now, when I was studying, I would practice 6 to 8 hours because I was crazy. But then I would only sleep for 4 hours because I was out all night partying. And you can imagine that my progress was zero. I mean, I got tense, but I did not progress with the pieces. So I think it's important to understand how the brain actually works with material that we study and that we learn, and that it has to be transferred. It's like a backup, from an active computer to your hard drive in the back, and that's what I'm doing now during COVID when I'm not touring. I'm rather enjoying my life here. I'm cooking 3 times a day and I'm sleeping my 8 hours, and I get to practice as much as I want. And of course I have to teach my students, which I enjoy very much. But there is sort of perfect conditions to learn a piece. And so many people say, oh, when you turn, I don't know, 30, like you cannot memorize something anymore, which is complete bullshit. I just think, first of all, we practice much more effectively, so we don't have that repetition going on all the time, and we don't get as much rest because of, I don't know, family or life or travel or whatever, for our brains to really retain what we've been working on. By the way, I'm really doing your trick with the with looking at the page. I'm doing it every day.
Oh, cool! And well, have you had one success already? I mean, did you get a piece quicker in, or you couldn't tell yet?
Well, I mean, I'm doing that with a concertante, and it starts to come in the fingers, and I did not expect it to come in the fingers that well. So I really think that helps a lot. By the way, another thing, I don't know if it's possible to see, but here are my earplugs that I've been using. I mean, I've used them for practice for quite some years now, but inspired by you, I've also used it in performance, and I felt so scared when I did it, but it helps. It's really cool.
Well, actually, I just see one of the comments. Paul Dundurand wanted to know about your personal memorizing technique. So you chose you tried out mine, but you must have had another way how to memorize.
No, I mean the way I like to think of it is that we have different pillars of memory. So we have the manual memory of the hands, then we have the photographic memory, or at least to know where it is on the page. I don't have photographic memory, but I know where things are on the page. Mm-hmm. Then there is the harmonic memory, just to know in what sort of vicinity of harmony we are, which I think is very helpful when it comes to Bach. And sometimes I've improvised in the harmony that I'm in, and mm-hmm. It sounded almost right. And then of course there's the melodic memory of just following the musical line. And I've had the experience that for example, when my melodic memory fades, so I don't know how the piece continues, I try to close my eyes and see, well, where am I on the page and what am I actually doing? And of course, this all happens within split seconds, but it's like in a car crash, when you approach the car crash, time goes slower. I've had many occasions where I just didn't know how it continues, and then you get yourself out of it. But I do think, coming back again to the subconscious, that sometimes it is good to just let the fingers do what they've been doing for weeks and months. And the fingers have an amazing memory themselves.
Yeah, I completely agree. The more pillars we use, the safer. I mean, if you only rely on the ear or the hand or the visual memory, that wouldn't be enough. But if we manage to have all those things, then actually we're quite safe. And then the last pillar would be, for me, doesn't matter. Even if there's a blackout, somehow we'll get back in. And it's not the end of the world. I mean, I have been in theater performances where I saw people completely get lost, and the audience is even more... I mean, I suffered with the guy on stage, but it made me somehow connect with him even better, because he's just a human. We don't want the perfect protagonist. We want somebody flesh and blood. So, like what the friends of Heifetz told him, he should play 1 or 2 notes out of tune every day so that the gods don't get jealous. So that's what we're doing. Because you and me, we could play perfect all the time, but we just put in the wrong notes so that the gods don't get jealous, isn't it?
You see, that's a really nice philosophy. I'll adopt that from now on.
There's one last patron I have not mentioned, Michael Tomlinson. He asked about interesting stories. So we could fill another 1.5 hours or 2 hours with interesting stories. But just say one little one. What would be the most outrageous or interesting story? Travel, luthier, cello, breakdown on stage, success. People were throwing underwear.
When I was 18 years old, I did a lot of live music now, which is an organization that sends people to perform at places where people don't usually get performances. Yeah, and I played in this plays for people with disabilities, and there was this young man who had very strong Down syndrome, and we started playing, and he started rocking in his wheelchair and got completely loud and was screaming and all that. I got so worried. I got so paranoid, and I said to the people that were working there, "Oh, I'm terribly, terribly sorry. I hope we didn't do anything wrong." This person seemed really upset, and they said, "No, don't worry about it. In fact, this person Thomas, he hadn't spoken or hadn't really made any connection with anybody." For 2 months, and it was the music that got him out of his let's say out of his silence and got him engaged again. And I felt, wow, so music actually really is able to touch people in a way that other interactions cannot. And at the time I had a really big crisis, because I felt, what am I doing with my life? I was 18 years old. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an architect. I'm not, I'm not saving lives or building houses or doing anything like that. And my sound evaporates within 2 seconds. And I felt after this moment when this young gentleman had really participated in a way emotionally with what I was doing, that I felt that music can change people or reach people in a way that other things cannot.
That's a very beautiful story. Actually, in my little tiny introduction, that's the one thing we have in common, being artists and residents of the Oregon Symphony, which includes, often artists in residence means you come, you play, and you give a masterclass, and you play some chamber music with the orchestra musician, that's it. But you and me, we both interpreted the role of an artist in residence quite differently. We yes. used it as an outreach. So when I saw, I think when your first artist in residency was with the RSB Berlin, I read some wonderful things you did. So kudos and chapeau for all these fantastic things, because that really shows why we do what we do. It's not to be celebrated on the big stage. That's nice, and it's a given, and we need to earn some money, obviously. But to go out where we don't get celebrated like that, but actually the feedback can be so much stronger and so much more meaningful. And actually I was 18 as well. I studied in Cincinnati when it wasn't called Live Now, but there was a program from the university which sent us to nursery homes and to some clinics where we played for mentally challenged, and I had exactly the same experience. I was playing Kodai, and this one young man started moving so strongly, and I felt bad. I wasn't polite enough to apologize afterwards, but people told me afterwards that was his emotions expressing through the move, and it also made clear to me the power of music, and which makes it so sad now to see that a wonderful nation, a cultural nation like Germany, cuts all the live music because of COVID. I'm here in Madrid, and my wife just played Rusalka last night, and I went to 5 concerts. They keep the music and the theaters open, even though obviously everybody knows it's one of the hotspots. But music is incredible, as essential as anything else, and if we don't understand how important it is, then why do we actually do it? Then it's just the little luxury thing some people think it is, and it's not.
But I think in general, this whole crisis is making us ask some very tough questions. What do we want to live for? Yeah. Why is it worth pursuing a life and not just, have children when you're 25 and then die because you're useless, because you procreated and that's it. But what do we want to? How do we want to shape our lives? Yeah, food and shelter obviously, is super important. But then it cannot just be Netflix. I refuse to believe that.
That's an excellent last statement, Johannes. Thank you so much for talking to me and being such a wonderful interview guest. Not better than as a host. As a host, you were the best I've ever had. So but as a guest, you're the best I've ever had also. Thanks a lot.
Well, given I was also the only one, so there you go.
No, you're the second one, and the first one was very nice and smart.
Great.
But,
That's wonderful.
but you're so much more engaging. But the next ones will have a hard time living up to what you set the standards to. So thanks a lot, and best wishes and much love to Vienna. I hope we'll see each other soon in live again.
I hope so too, and all the very best to your patrons, and yeah, thanks to them for those engaging questions and for having such a really alive community. I think this is what Patreon is about, and you guys are really doing it great. So and thank you for having me on. That's really, really awesome.
Thanks, Johannes. All best.